We're going to march forward with this. Okay, so this week our class is all about traditions. It's all about the traditions, and it's all about how we relate to traditions as opposed to relating to archaeological finds, perhaps, that come up. So we're going to start with a discussion about the priestly garments, because in this week's Torah portion, the Torah talks about the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the garments of the high priest. And it's known that while the regular priests had 4 garments, the high priest had a total of 8 garments. Now, these garments included some fancy headgear or headwear, there was a nice hat, as well as what was called the tzitz, which is a forehead plate made of gold that the high priest used to wear. So I'm going to read some of these texts. You can listen along because you don't have it on your screen, but you can listen along and hopefully you'll be able to catch the gist of the text and follow along, albeit imperfectly. Okay, so this is coming from the book of Exodus, chapter 39, verses 30 and 31. And it says that they made the forehead plate, the holy crown of pure gold, and they inscribed upon it an inscription like the engravings of a seal, Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. And they placed upon it a cord of blue wool to place over the cap from above, as God had commanded Moses. In other words, the high priest was meant to wear on his forehead a forehead plate made of gold. It was the width of 2 fingers wide, or tall, so to speak, and it wrapped around the front of his forehead, and there were 2 holes in the sides of the gold with 2 ropes attached, or strings attached to the side, and 1 that attached to the top, and with that it secured to the high priest's head. Now, the Torah tells us, again in Exodus, that the way they made it, per God's command, is that inscribed on the gold forehead plate was the words, Kodesh LaHashem, holy unto God. And that is something that requires a lot of further study, because as the Talmud points out, there is a dispute amongst the sages as to just how those words were placed. So I'm going to read to you, this is text number 2, this is coming from the Talmud tractate Shabbat, and the Talmud says the following: the tzitz, which is the forehead plate, was a kind of golden plate 2 finger breadths broad, and it stretched around the forehead from ear to ear, and upon it was written in 2 lines, Yud He above, and Kodesh La below. But Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said, I saw it in the city of Rome, and Kodesh LaHashem was written on 1 line. So here we have a dispute. The sages, the majority of the sages, say that the words Kodesh LaHashem, which means holy unto God, were written on 2 lines. God's name on top, and the word Kodesh, holy, below. So you would read it really from below to above. Kodesh LaHashem, holy unto God. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said, I myself went to Rome, and in Rome I saw the tzitz, I saw the forehead plate, and it was written on 1 line. Now this is referring to after the destruction of the Second Temple. So Rabbi Eliezer is giving first-hand testimony about the tzitz, about the high priest's forehead plate, that he saw that it was not written on 2 lines, but rather on 1 line. Now, this might surprise you, because although there's a dispute in the Talmud, we have what's called halacha. Every time there's a dispute, so there's a way in which we arrive at the consensus of what the law really indeed is. And usually the way it works is the majority rules. In this case, the majority ruled, or the majority's opinion was that it was written on 2 lines. First God's name, and then the word holy. The minority opinion is this Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, who himself said that he saw it and it was written on 1 line. Maimonides, Rambam, the great halachic authority, he rules in his laws of vessels of the temple, he rules like the majority. And I'm going to read to you exactly what Maimonides writes. Maimonides says, how is the forehead plate made? We make a plate of gold, 2 finger breadths wide, that extends over the forehead of the high priest from one ear to the other. Again, these are the words of Maimonides in Halacha, in Jewish law. And then Maimonides continues to say, upon it is written, Kodesh Lashem, in 2 lines. Kodesh, holy, on the lower line, and Lashem, to God, on the upper line. Maimonides clearly tells us that the words holy unto God that were written on the forehead plate of the high priest, they were written not on 1 line but on 2 lines, which begs the question. It's nice that the sages believed that it was written on 2 lines, but how do you go against eyewitness testimony? There's an actual archaeological find, or I don't know if it's archaeological, but there's an actual historical artifact that Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, saw himself in Rome, maybe around the Vatican, who knows, but he saw the actual forehead plate, and the forehead plate had the inscription on 1 line, and yet in halacha, that the halachas say that we say that it goes by that it was 2 lines, like the opinion of the sages. So again, our question is, how do we go against the eyewitness testimony? In other words, is an archaeological find, and how can we conceive that this is the case, that an archaeological find would have less credence than the tradition itself? Tradition would seem to be something that would go away in the face of an actual archaeological find. Okay, so that brings us to the core question of our class, which is, how much stock do we really put in tradition? How much credence do we grant tradition? Because we have a tradition in a certain way, because we have a tradition in a certain way, does that really mean that we should ignore evidence to the contrary? And what type of evidence perhaps should be ignored or should be taken seriously? I want to read to you a text from one of the commentaries on the Talmud, known as the Meiri, Rabbi Menachem Meiri, who lived in the 13th century. So the Meiri writes, he was from France. The Meiri says, although one of the greatest sages testified that I saw in the city of Rome, the tzitz, the forehead plate, and Kodesh LaHashem was written on only 1 line, even eyewitness testimony would not lead the sages to deny their known tradition. And to that I ask the simple question, why? Why didn't the rabbis recant their position once they had a rabbi testifying that he had seen with his own eyes the forehead plate written, with the words written not on 2 lines, as was the tradition, but on 1 line? Why is tradition so important? Okay, so to understand this better, we're going to look at another one of the vessels, of the items of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle of God. And the vessel I'm referring to, the vessel we're going to explore, is the menorah, the candelabra. So the candelabra, which is probably one of the most famous symbols in Judaism till this very day, aside from maybe the Star of David, what greater symbol is there than the menorah? So the menorah was fashioned out of pure gold, was very ornate, and also very complicated. So I want to read to you the verses in this week's Torah portion that describe in detail the crafting of the menorah out of gold. 7, verse 17. Referring to the actual construction of this vessel. And he made the candlestick of pure gold. This is referring to the chief craftsman Bezalel. And he made the candlestick of pure gold of beaten work. He made the candlestick, even its base and its shaft, its cups, its knobs, and its flowers were of one piece with it. Now this, I'm just going to cut in for a second into the verses. This bespeaks the idea that the menorah, with all of its ornate detail, was all crafted and hammered out of one solid piece of gold. It wasn't cobbled together, welded together various pieces. Rather, it was made of one solid. They start off with one chunk of gold and then hammered it into all of the details. And let's continue inside. And there were 6 branches going out of the sides thereof, 3 branches of the candlestick out of the one side thereof, and 3 branches of the candlestick out of the other side thereof. So we have a center stem, just to summarize, and 3 branches extending on either side. 3 cups, the verse continues, 3 cups were made like almond blossoms in one branch, a knob and a flower, and 3 cups were made like almond blossoms in the other branch, a knob and a flower. So it was for the 6 branches going out of the candlestick. And in the candlestick there were 4 cups made like almond blossoms, the knobs thereof and the flowers thereof. And a knob under 2 branches of one piece with it, and a knob under the next 2 branches of one piece with it, and a knob under the third 2 branches of one piece with it, for the 6 branches going out of it. And again, it's very detailed. To really understand it, you have to really break it down and see pictures of it so you can really see how beautiful it was. But there was a lot of decorative features on the candelabra, on the menorah. The knobs and their branches were of one piece with it. The whole of it was one beaten work of pure gold, like I mentioned before, all hammered out of one solid piece. And he made the lamps thereof 7, and the tongs thereof, and the snuff dishes thereof of pure gold. Of a talent of pure gold he made it, and all the vessels thereof. Okay, so here we have a basic description of the menorah. There was a center stem, 3 branches emanating from either side of that center stem, for a total of 7 branches or 7 lamps. By the way, parenthetically, unlike our Chanukiot, our Hanukkah menorah, which has 4 on each side and a taller center branch, the temple menorah, or the Mishkan menorah, the tabernacle menorah, had 3 on either side, not 4, and the center stem was not taller than the others. It was the same height. It was equally as tall as the other ones because all 7 were part of the temple menorah mitzvah. But one detail, we have all the details of the cups and the knobs and the flowers and the almond blossoms. All of the details are specified except for one central important point, which is how were the branches extending from the center stem? Were they diagonal or were they curved? In other words, you have a center stem. Were the branches, the 3 on either side, did they come out as diagonal lines or as curved branches? Were they straight branches or curved branches? So I'll quote right now, this is text number 6 in our books, 169. I'm going to quote Rashi, one of the primary, or if not the primary, biblical commentary, who writes the following. He's referring to the biblical words that says that the branches were coming out of its sides of the center stem. And here's Rashi's words. From here and there, in other words, in both directions, they were coming out diagonally, drawn upward until they reached the height of the menorah, which is the middle stem. They came out of the middle stem, one higher than the other. The bottom one was the longest, the one above it was shorter than it, and the highest one shorter than that, because the height of their ends at their tops was equal to the height of the 7th middle stem, out of which the 6 branches extended. Rashi is telling us some very basic mathematics, right? Which is that if you have a center stem, and this is basic trigonometry or whatever it is, if you have a center stem and you have 3 branches extending, so the lowest branch has to be the tallest in order to reach the same height as this middle stem. The one above it, less long, and the one above it would be the shortest of those 3 branches. And again, that would be replicated on the other side so that they're all equidistant. Rashi clearly tells us the branches of the menorah emanated from the center stem in a diagonal line, not in a curved, not as curved branches, but as straight diagonal branches. Now, many of you are familiar with the curved branch depiction of the menorah. The question is there a source in Jewish writings for the curved branch menorah concept? The answer is yes. I'll refer you to our next text. This is coming from an 18th century Italian rabbi and scholar whose name was Rabbi Emanuel Chai Ricci. And Rabbi Ricci, who wrote a book called Maaseh Choshev, he was a mystic, a Kabbalist, He was a poet, and he also wrote a book, a very important book, detailing all of the nuances of the tabernacle portions right now, this building of the Mishkan. So he details exactly how it was built, and what the garments looked like, all of the details of the Mishkan. So here's how he describes it, and I'll read it to you. So, but listen in for this to hear clues as to how he describes the branches. This is text 7a on page 170. He says, he starts from the bottom. The height of the menorah is 18 handbreadths. Handbreadth is kind of like the width of a hand. Its base and flower ornament measure 3 handbreadths. Then there are 2 smooth handbreadths, then one with a cup, flower, and orb ornament, then 2 smooth, then one with an orb ornament, from which 2 branches emerge, from one to this side and one to the other. And here's what he says now. Continuing in a curve and rising to the height of the menorah. So he says that the branches went down and curved back up to the other side. And he continues, he says, then one smooth, then one with an orb, from which 2 branches emerge, from one to this side and one to the other, continuing in a curve and rising to the height of the menorah. So 3 times for the 3 branches, right, the 3 levels of branches. He talks about these branches not extending in a diagonal, but rather extending as a curve. And it's very important that we understand that this is coming from a very well-respected source and a very well-respected rabbi regarding the building of the Mishkan. He clearly says that it was curved branches. Now, in his own glosses, in his own notes, this rabbi, this Italian rabbi, Rabbi Ricci, explains why he writes that it's curved. So he says, the word curved does not appear in the Talmudic account of the menorah. This is text 7b 171. So he himself says, curved, the word curved does not appear in the Talmudic account of the menorah, and from Rashi's biblical commentary, the one that we cited before, which he writes that they emerged at an angle, it appears that it was not curved. So he, in other words, he's asking a question really essentially on his own position, where he says the branches were curved. He says, well, the Talmud doesn't say that it was curved, and Rashi says that it wasn't curved, so really the question now is, so why am I saying that it is curved? Look what he says. However, Maimonides, in his own work, did not mention the word angle, writing simply that the branches continue and rise, and the other early commentaries write the same. In other words, what this Rabbi Ricci is saying is that although the Talmud doesn't mention that it was curved, and Rashi seems to imply that they were not curved but straight, if you look at the great halachic codifier known as Maimonides, Maimonides does not indicate that it was straight or diagonal lines. Rather, he seems to, he doesn't write that they were angled. Let me continue inside. The author of Chachmas HaMishkan, which is another book, infers, which means the wisdom of the tabernacle, infers from this that the branches were almost semicircular. Indeed, this is likely so, since in this way they resemble the heavenly spheres that the planets orbit through, to which the 7 lights of the menorah are said to correspond. So this rabbi, Rabbi Ricci, the Italian rabbi, says that although the Talmud doesn't tell us that the branches were curved, and although Rashi tells us that the branches were not curved, I say that the branches were curved. Why? I'm basing it on Maimonides. Maimonides doesn't say that they were at an angle, and Maimonides, he says, surely would have said that, would have believed that they were curved, because the curve of these branches would beautifully resemble the heavenly spheres. The heavenly spheres in which the planets orbit. So it's circular, it's spherical. So 7 branches, 7 heavens. So he says it makes sense that they would be curved like the celestial beings and like the heavens. That's what he says. Many take issue with what he writes, and in fact we're going to do that right now, because a big support for himself, his own support for his position they were curved, is coming from the fact that Rambam, Maimonides, does not mention anything about them being diagonal, and that surely Maimonides would have believed that they would be curved to match the heavenly spheres. And yet, there's one hole in this theory, because you and I can speculate from today to tomorrow what Maimonides believed about the menorah, but we have actual written evidence what the Rambam believed, what Maimonides believed about the menorah. Take a look at text number 8. This is 172. This is a text written by the son of Maimonides, Rabbi Avram, the son of Rambam, the son of Maimonides. And Rabbi Avram, the son of Maimonides, writes, 6 branches extend straight out from the body of the menorah toward its top, as my father, blessed memory, depicted it, not with a curve, as someone else has drawn it. The son of Rambam, the son of Maimonides, was born in the year 1186 and passed away in 1237. Already in the early 13th century, Maimonides' son is testifying that his father believed and maintained and depicted that the menorah did not have curved branches like others depict, but rather straight, i.e. diagonal, branches emerging from that center stem. And so this really puts an end to Rabbi Riki's speculation. Rabbi Riki says that his position that they were curved is based on the fact that he's reading that into Maimonides. Clearly, he didn't have access to the writings of Maimonides' own son, who testifies that his father believed that they were not rounded but straight. You can't argue against the son of Maimonides. Who has more credence? Right? The son of Maimonides to tell us what he believed, or a rabbi living 600 years later who's reading into the text of Maimonides? Certainly Maimonides' own son. But the truth is, there's another piece of evidence that is even more clear, and that is we have, in the last century, we've uncovered a manuscript of Rambam, of Maimonides, and an original drawing of Maimonides in which he depicts the menorah, the candelabra, as having branches that come out from the center stem at a diagonal, not curved. So, Maimonides' own drawing, we found it, and it has diagonal branches. Maimonides' son testifies that they're diagonal branches. Rashi tells us that they're diagonal branches. The Talmud never makes mention of them being curved. All evidence, all tradition points to the fact that the menorah had, in the temple, or the Mishkan, had straight diagonal branches, not curved branches. So where do the curved branches come from? According to most opinions, according to most theories, the notion of curved candelabra comes from the depiction in the Arch of Titus. So in Rome, there is the famous Arch of Titus. Titus was the Roman emperor, the Roman general, later became emperor, who destroyed the temple, the second temple, in the year 69 of the Common Era. And upon his victory parade, his victory march home, they erected this beautiful and ornate, well, at least for the Romans it was beautiful, this very ornate arch that has, on one side of the arch is engraved, is etched in the stone, a picture of Titus being drawn by a wonderful chariot. And on the other side, it has a depiction of Jews being schlepped into exile, and the captors, candelabra, is depicted as being curved. And for many people, that itself is the greatest form of evidence that the temple menorah was indeed curved and not diagonal, because it's in the Arch of Titus. How do you argue against the Arch of Titus? I want to share with you the following idea to kind of resolve this dispute. The dispute between the Rambam and the Roman, Maimonides and Titus. Who was right? Maimonides says the branches were diagonal. The Arch of Titus says that they were curved. So who's right? I want to share with you what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said about this. And here is text number 9 on page 173. The simple explanation might be this. The menorah engraved on the Arch of Titus is not the correct depiction of the temple menorah. Indeed, there are several other details that don't match the design of the temple menorah. For example, the menorah on the Arch of Titus even bears an etching of a dragon, and we know clearly that there was no etching of a dragon on the temple's menorah. The Rebbe continues, it is therefore reasonable to say that the depiction of the menorah on the arch was, from its inception, not a depiction of the temple menorah, but rather of another menorah that bore certain similarities to the temple menorah. Since the temple menorah was so important, other menorot, other candelabras, would be made to have a similar appearance to it, especially among idol worshippers. This explains the added etching of a dragon, which is known to have been associated with idolatry. The menorah on the arch was then modeled after one of those menorot. So here we have the Rebbe teaching us, or giving us, a wonderful explanation. We're going to call this the multiple menorah theory. And that is that the menorah depicted in the Arch of Titus is not at all the menorah that Moses created, or that Solomon created in the temple, or that the Jews, but it's not the same menorah. The menorah in the temple and the tabernacle, the menorah was diagonal. The menorah of Titus was curved. Why? Because Titus's menorah was not the original menorah. What's depicted was a candelabra, not the candelabra. It's a menorah, but it's not the menorah. And there are many differences in the base, in the design, and as we know now, in the shape, that tell us clearly that this is not the same menorah as the temple menorah. In other words, we have it on tradition that the temple menorah was diagonal. When the Arch of Titus shows us a curved menorah, that doesn't mean that we had our tradition wrong, because it's our tradition. We know it to be true. It's been passed down from generation to generation. We know it was diagonal. So how do you explain the Arch of Titus? Simple. There were other candelabras around. Other candelabras. Even in the temple they had other candelabras that they used to produce light. It wasn't only, there was one mitzvah candelabra. But remember, they didn't have electricity, so there were many other candelabras. That was one of the other candelabras. And maybe even from a non-holy source. Maybe even associated with idolatry. Here we have another text from another scholar who lived in the early 1900s, who also writes this about the distinction between the menorah of the Arch of Titus and the original Jewish menorah. What is shared by all of the manuscripts of Rambam, of Maimonides, is that the 6 branches come out of the central branch and rise in a straight line to the top of the menorah without any curve whatsoever. Again, it's clear that in our tradition, the menorah was not curved, it was straight. This is unlike the popular image copied from the Arch of Titus, which has already been demonstrated to be a forgery, he says. This is Rabbi Yosef Kabach. So he says it's a forgery, the one in the Arch of Titus, since the Breita, which is a teaching from the era of the Mishnah, the Breita clearly states that the menorah had legs, as does our teacher Maimonides describe here in his work Mishnah Torah. So the temple menorah had legs, but in the commonly distributed image in the Arch of Titus, and you can Google it for yourself, or if maybe you've seen it even in person, in the commonly distributed image in the Arch of Titus, however, it is depicted, the menorah is depicted sitting atop a wide base. There are no legs, it's just a wide base. And along with many other contradictions which need not be addressed here, the point is there are so many differences, distinctions, and nuances that distinguish the way we know the temple menorah from the Arch of Titus menorah, that it simply can't be the same menorah. Again, this is the multiple menorah theory, but it's not so much a theory as something that seems to be pretty obvious. It's not the same menorah. So what happens when our tradition is confronted with archaeological evidence, right? Our tradition says the menorah was slanted, was diagonal, was straight lines, straight branches. The archaeological evidence, i.e. the Arch of Titus, tells us that it was rounded. So what do? We give up our tradition? Of course not. Why? Because who tells you what the Arch of Titus is depicting? How do you know which menorah was in the Arch of Titus? It's an assumption that's made that depiction of a candelabra in the Arch of Titus must have been the temple menorah. But who says? That's someone looking at it and making a logical or a cognitive jump to presume or assume that that's the same thing. But our tradition is our tradition. We know that it wasn't. That's not how it looked. So we don't need to be concerned about the evidence, so to speak, because it's not evidence at all to the temple menorah. It's evidence of another candelabra that has no bearing on any of this. In fact, there's a text from Josephus, the great Jewish Roman historian, who I'll just tell you a quick synopsis of what he says in text 11 on page 175. It says that one of the high priests came to Titus at a certain point in time, and with him were two menorot of the golden menorah that were in the temple. It was two of the menorot, two of the candelabras, which means there were many candelabras, and he brought two of them. What kind of many candelabras? There was one menorah. The answer is there was one holy menorah, but many other candelabras. So whether that candelabra was the one that had a dragon, the ones that he brought, the high priest brought to Titus, was one that had a dragon on it or not is irrelevant. The point is there were multiple menorot, multiple candelabras that produced light, but only one candelabra that we call the menorah with a capital M, which had diagonal lines. Okay. The Rebbe continues to explain that by Jews depicting the menorah as having curved branches, without intending, what we're doing is giving credence to the one who destroyed the temple and taking away from the temple itself. The temple itself had a straight branch menorah, and if we depict, if we draw, if we replicate curved branch menorahs, it's really giving more energy to the negative, to the Arch of Titus. So here's in the Rebbe's words how the Rebbe says this, page 176, text 12. Aside from being entirely inaccurate, the depiction of the menorah in the Arch of Titus was made, of course, as a part of establishing Rome's authority and rule over the Jews, God forbid. The words Judea Capta, the Jews have been conquered, were even inscribed in many places. For example, a series of commemorative coins issued at the time. In other words, Rome didn't just destroy the temple and exile the Jews. Rome wanted to rub our noses, rub our faces in it. And the Arch of Titus is a way for the Romans to show their authority, their power, dominion over the Jews in the temple and Judaism itself. I'm going to get back inside. At certain times, Jews would be forced to come to the Arch so that they would see what is written in. So let's not celebrate the menorah, the false menorah that's depicted there. Let's not be convinced that was the real menorah. That's the fake menorah. That's a candelabra. Let's rather pay homage to the real temple menorah, and not the one that was made to spite the Jews and to make fun of the Jews. So the Rebbe continues. If this is correct, this is text 13 in our books, page 177. If this is correct, it would be appropriate to restore things to the way they were, that anyone depicting the menorah, in order to teach how the menorah that was in the tabernacle and the temple looked, so anyone depicting the menorah should draw the branches of the menorah diagonally. Footnote, the Rebbe says, based on this, there are grounds for saying that Chanukiot, our Hanukkah menorot, should also be made with their branches at an angle, again, to play up the Jewish menorah and to play down the evil Roman general and emperor's menorah. Again, Rambam or the Roman, which do you choose? Straight branch menorah or curved? Our tradition says straight. Let's affirm that and not run after what Titus had depicted on the arch. Now, let's get back to the golden forehead plate that sits. That's how we started the class. So, in the beginning of the class, we explained that the Talmud cites two opinions as to how the lettering of the tzitz was laid out. Did it say on one line, Kodesh Lashem, holy unto God, or was it two lines? First, God's name, and then the word holy underneath it. The majority of the rabbis said 2 lines. One rabbi says, I was in Rome, I saw it, it had 1 line. And the halacha is, like the majority of the sages, we don't follow according to halacha, we don't follow the opinion of the one who says, I saw myself in Rome. And now you know why. Because what he saw in Rome wasn't necessarily the original forehead plate of the holy priest in the temple. How do we know? Just because in other words, we don't doubt that this great rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yossi, went to Rome, and we don't doubt that he saw something that looked like a forehead plate, and we also don't doubt his memory that he saw it all written on 1 line. All of it is true. He was there, he saw it, and it was written on 1 line. But what did he see? And how do you and I know what he saw? Moreover, how does he know what he saw? This is years after the temple's destruction. How does he know that this artifact, that this archaeological piece of evidence is the original forehead plate of the holy priest? Maybe it's a knockoff. Maybe it's a replica. Maybe it's a replica. They wouldn't make it exactly the original. They would make it look similar. It's like kids. There's a Torah scroll that's written special ink on parchment, kosher, etc. And then they have these small mini Torah scrolls for kids. Usually just printed on paper. Maybe God's name is taken out so that when it falls on the floor, it's not a bad thing. But it's a Torah for the kids to get used to holding the Torah and to express their love for Torah. You sometimes as a toy or whatever it is, kids get a mini Torah. So imagine someone finds that Torah, and they find it years later, and they say, "Aha! There's another version of Torah that doesn't have God's name in it." There must be another tradition. How do you know it's not a replica? It's a replica. It's not the original thing. So the sage's retort to Rabbi Yossi is, we don't believe that what you saw in Rome, that you think was the forehead plate, we don't believe that that was the original forehead plate. We believe that it is a forehead plate with those words on it written in 1 line, but that's not how it looked originally. And why don't they believe so? Because they had a tradition. What's a tradition? A tradition means that going back in an unbroken chain, back to the times of Moses, back to the time certainly of the temple, there's a tradition of how this forehead plate looked. And the sages, the majority of the sages were taught, always, and their teachers taught them, and their teachers taught them, etc., going up, that the forehead plate had 2 lines of text. God's name and the word holy. Kodesh Lashem. So now somebody comes and says, guys, I saw it, and it's not true. So do you give up your tradition? Logic says, yeah. But again, looking at it deeper, it's actually logical to say, or to question, what he actually saw. How does he know that what he saw was the original forehead plate? Maybe it was just a replica that was imperfect, that was not created in a way to match the original. We find this, and that's why according to the halakha, according to Jewish law, we say, Maimonides says that it was 2 lines. I'll read to you how the Rebbe frames this. Even though Rabbi Eliezer, this is text 15, page 179, even though Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, did see a forehead plate at tzitz in Rome, this does not constitute clear proof that it was the tzitz of the high priest. It is possible that it was an ornament produced by someone in a likeness somewhat similar to that of the tzitz. In other words, it was a knockoff or a replica. This ornament might have been placed for some reason, perhaps in order to save the true tzitz from the Romans, just as might have happened with the menorah together with the temple utensils sitting in Rome. Wow. And here we have another element as well. And the Rebbe says, maybe the Jews, before the temple was destroyed, maybe they hid the real stuff and they pulled out replicas, and Rome captured the replicas and not the real thing. When the Romans destroyed the temple and took the vessels captive, it's very possible that they did not get the original items. They didn't get the original menorah. That's why they got a rounded candelabra. They didn't get the original menorah. The menorah was hidden. It was put away. and they didn't get the original garments of the high priest, including they didn't get the forehead plate. What they got was a replica that was made to not look exactly like the original. That's how the Jews probably knew which one was which, because it didn't look like the original. So the fact that it's now sitting in Rome doesn't mean that that's how it looked. On the contrary, that's how it didn't look, because that's the fake. That's, again, we don't know for sure, but one thing is for sure. When you have a tradition, an ironclad tradition, and then you have, what seems to be a new discovery, the discovery itself doesn't tell you what it is. The forehead plate that this Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, saw in Rome, did not tell him that it was the original tzitz. That was an assumption that he made. And does that assumption override ironclad, well-rooted tradition? The answer is no. The same thing is true with the menorah. We know that the menorah had diagonal lines. The fact that an arch of Titus depicts around a candelabra doesn't do anything, doesn't mean anything. They depict it around the menorah. Wonderful. They can depict whatever they want. Why did they pick that menorah? Go ask the carvers. Who knows what they were looking at? Who knows what they had in their hands? But our menorah had diagonal branches. This is the power of tradition. I'll give you a few more examples to really bring this home. There's a dispute regarding tefillin. So the tefillin, of course, are the black boxes worn by Jewish men above the age of bar mitzvah. One box is worn on the arm, and one box is worn on the head. And there are 4 sections of Torah that are penned on parchment and placed sections, is cited by Maimonides and Rashi. Rashi's grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, he had a different opinion to his grandfather, and he has a different opinion about the order of the sections. Everyone agrees about which 4 sections are put into the tefillin. Now, inside the boxes there are scrolls. Everyone agrees as to which 4 are in there. The question is, what's the order? Which of the sections comes first? Rashi and Maimonides have their opinion. Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, has a different opinion. Well, we have an amazing story that happens. At some point in history, the tomb of Ezekiel, Yecheskel Hanavi, the great Jewish prophet Ezekiel, there was some construction mishap or some sort of structural compromising of Ezekiel's tomb, and above his tomb there was found to be a little hollow area in which was buried a pair of tefillin, a pair of the tefillin. And when they opened them up, they saw that the portions, that the scrolls were written in the order of Rashi and Rambam, Rashi and Maimonides. And suddenly all the rabbis said, oh, this is clear evidence that which is the correct way of the tefillin, Rashi and Rambam, and not like Rabbeinu Tam. In fact, this is what the Beis Yosef, one of the great halachis, one of the greatest authorities of Jewish law, this is what he writes. Text 17:181. The Smag and Mordechai both write of a report that was once sent from the land of Israel that a platform above the tomb of Ezekiel had collapsed to reveal an ancient pair of tefillin made in the order described by Maimonides and Rashi. In a response to him, the Rashba wrote on this matter at length, rejecting the words of Rabbeinu Tam and supporting the words of Rashi and Maimonides. At the end of the response to him, he writes, in the final word, my opinion tends toward that of Rashi and Maimonides, upon them we rely and act. In a German response to him, I found, in these words, since we have not seen our venerable rabbis using 2 pairs of tefillin, the body must follow the head, and thus we rely on that which the Smag has written regarding the finding at Ezekiel's tomb. So again, in Ezekiel's tomb, they found tefillin that followed the opinion of Rashi and Rambam, and not like Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore all these great rabbis said, it seems to be that must be the way that tefillin are supposed to look. However, the interesting thing here is that there's another rabbi who had a different opinion. This is Rabbi Falk, the Pnei Yeshua, text 18, page 182. I heard in the name of my teacher that one ought not to disregard Rabbeinu Tam's order of the tefillin on account of the discovery of Rashi's tefillin over Ezekiel's tomb. On the contrary, Rabbeinu Tam could well respond that these tefillin were invalid precisely because they were written in that order. In other words, the camp of Rabbeinu Tam, or Rabbeinu Tam himself, could have said, why were those tefillin buried? Because they weren't kosher, they weren't written right. They were written like my grandfather's opinion, not like mine. It is for this reason they were interred in the tomb, as it is the practice to bury and inter invalid Torah scrolls in the tomb of a tzaddik. That's why it was buried in that space of Ezekiel, because they weren't kosher, not because they were kosher, which highlights the inherent difficulty in understanding archaeological finds. Are you finding it? When you find something, when you find a piece, when you dig up a piece of evidence, what does it mean? What does it mean? Are those tefillin buried there as a proof that that's the way they should be written, like Rashi? Or are they buried there as a proof that that's how they should not be written, which is a proof to Rabbeinu Tam? So who determines that? The archaeological find itself doesn't declare what it means. It's you and I. It's the finders of this archaeological find who decipher the meaning of the find and what message it holds. And that's subjective. So one camp might say it supports us, and the other camp might say it supports us. So who's right? We don't know. But one thing is certain. No archaeological find, which is inherently fraught with ambiguity, no archaeological find could ever contradict or contravene or override clear Jewish tradition, because that is not filled with ambiguity. That's clear. We find a similar notion with regards to a more recent archaeological find, and I'm referring to the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the middle of the 20th century. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in caves in Israel near the Dead Sea. So there were several scrolls, there are many scrolls that mirrored closely to the accepted biblical text, the text of Jewish scripture. But in addition, there were other writings that disagreed, dissenting writings against Jewish tradition. And so the question is, what does it all mean? What do these scrolls tell us? And many historians and archaeologists have their opinion as to what it means. But here's what the Rebbe said about this in 1955. This is text 21, page 185. With regard to the buried scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I haven't yet had the time to look into the scholarly debate on the matter, as it is well known that disagreements range from one extreme to the other. So there's a wide range of opinions on these Dead Sea Scrolls. However, from my superficial reading and viewing of several facsimiles, it appears the writing method, as pertaining to which letters are spelled in full and so on, is that of a layman who likely made mistakes in the transcription out of ignorance. Therefore, extra caution is needed in establishing the authority of the scrolls, especially since the regard for their original interment is not known. In other words, don't run to start changing Judaism based on these scrolls. We don't know who wrote them, why they wrote them, and also why they were buried in the first place. Text 22, and here the Rebbe speaks about this again in 1983, page 186. From all of the above, a lesson emerges for our present day. In recent times, several storage areas containing scrolls of scriptural texts have been discovered, in which there are several differences from our tradition, with missing or additional letters and so on. In other words, the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in with different, sometimes a letter here, a letter there, different than our traditional Torah text. It must be clear, says the Rebbe, that these archaeological finds, although they might appear to constitute eyewitness testimony, have no part in our tradition, especially since we cannot know whether the authors of these buried scrolls were great sages or not. Moreover, it is quite possible that these scrolls were buried specifically because they were written counter to accepted halacha, Jewish law. This is in contrast to the tradition we possess, which was transmitted from one person to another, generation after generation, going back to Moses. Its truth is abundantly clear, and this is the text that we'll conclude our class on. When we have a tradition that's been passed down that's been validated and verified, that becomes ironclad. That becomes truth. Now you have a discovery of Dead Sea Scrolls. You can't say that the Dead Sea Scrolls, oh, look at this, the smoking gun. It's different than we had thought. Who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls? How do you know they were written in accordance with any authenticity? Maybe they were buried because they were inauthentic, because they were riddled with mistakes. We don't know. One thing is for sure. When you find something, when something pops up as new that looks old, you don't know what it means. To determine the meaning is to impose upon what you found a meaning. Then the question is, which has more authority? The meaning that's imposed right now by somebody who's looking to maybe publish a paper, or is the truth lying in a tradition that's been unbroken for thousands of years? And the answer in Judaism is a lot of shifting in the world around us and a lot of upheaval. And there might be evidence in modern times that things have to change and things have to be different. But one thing is for sure, that in 2020, you and I have the opportunity to connect over the internet from maybe the comforts of our own homes and study Torah. The tradition is alive. Judaism celebrates tradition. Celebrates tradition over sometimes the stuff that's new that could contradict tradition. So let us remember the power of tradition. Let us keep tradition alive. And let us continue to bring light into the world through studying Torah and doing good deeds. Thank you for joining me tonight for Torah